before the flood, before the ark, before the catastrophe that shattered the ancient world and remade it in silence and ash. There walked a man, not a king, not a conqueror, not a prophet clutching tablets of stone, a man whose name, in the original Hebrew, whispers something almost too enormous to contain. Enoch, the initiated one, the one who has been dedicated, the one set apart before the foundations of the earth had finished settling. Genesis chapter 5. One of the most overlooked passages in all of sacred literature. A genealogy, dry, repetitive, seemingly mechanical. So-and-so lived so many years, begat sons and daughters, and he died. And he died. And he died. The death knell of a generation rings again and again across those ancient verses like a funeral drum. It is monotonous. It is relentless. It is the oldest truth written into human existence. The wages of the fall is death. And then, silence. A break in the pattern so sudden it feels like a shockwave. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. 6 words in the English rendering. In the Hebrew, barely more. But those 6 words have haunted theologians, mystics, archaeologists, and seekers for 3,000 years. They have driven monks to candlelit cells and scholars to crumbling archives. They have surfaced in the Dead Sea Scrolls. They have echoed in the texts of the Ethiopian highlands and in the hidden libraries of Alexandria before the flames consumed them. Because Genesis does not say Enoch died, in a chapter defined by death, in a list where every other patriarch lived his appointed years and surrendered to the earth, Enoch simply vanishes, taken, translated, lifted beyond the veil of mortal reckoning. Who was this man? What did he see? What did he know? And why, of all the figures in the antediluvian world, was his memory so carefully buried, his writings sealed away, his name stripped from the canonical record for nearly 2,000 years? The answers are older than the pyramids, and they are more dangerous than most are willing to admit. Welcome to Bible Secrets, Hidden History. Before we descend into these ancient archives together, consider this. The truth preserved in these forgotten corridors of history has been suppressed, debated, and hidden for millennia. If you believe this knowledge deserves to endure, if you believe the seeker deserves access to what has been deliberately concealed, then subscribe to this channel and leave a like. It is a small act, but it ensures that what has been buried may yet reach those who are ready to receive it. Chapter 1. The Forgotten Lineage. To understand Enoch, one must first understand the world into which he was born. Not the world of stone tablets and burning bushes, not the world of Egyptian bondage or Babylonian exile. We are speaking of a world so ancient that modern scholarship has only begun to scrape its surface. The Antediluvian era, the age before the waters came and erased everything. Genesis chapter 5 is the architectural blueprint of that vanished world. It is a lineage, the line of Seth, the 3rd son of Adam. And it reads like a list of impossibilities to the modern ear. Men living 900 years, 800 years, 700. The numbers themselves feel mythological, and many have dismissed them as such. But pause. Consider what the ancient rabbinical commentators understood about this genealogy that most modern readers have simply walked past. This is not merely a list of names and ages. This is a document of spiritual succession. Each name in the Sethite line carries within it a prophetic meaning, a divine declaration embedded in the very act of naming. The ancient Hebrews understood that a name was not an identifier. A name was a destiny, Adam, man, or from the red clay, Adamah, the earth from which he was shaped. Seth, appointed, the one placed in the lineage after the tragedy of Abel. Enoch, mortal, frail, the generation in which, we are told, men began to call upon the name of the Lord. Kenan, sorrow, a weight descending on the line. Mahalalel, the blessed God, a sudden upward turn, praise erupting in the midst of grief. Jared, shall come down, shall descend, a word that carries ominous undertones that we will return to. And then Enoch, the seventh from Adam. 7, the number of completion, the number of perfection, the number that ancient numerology, Hebrew and Babylonian alike, associated with divine fullness. It is no accident that Enoch occupies the 7th position. The writer of Genesis understood exactly what that placement communicated. The Epistle of Jude, one of the most neglected texts in the New Testament, echoes this explicitly. Jude quotes directly from the Book of Enoch, a text that would not be rediscovered by Western scholarship for nearly 2 millennia, and identifies its author as Enoch, the 7th from Adam, who prophesied. The 7th from Adam, prophesied, past tense, a recognition that Enoch's words had weight, that they were known, that they had circulated among the early followers of the Way before someone, somewhere, at some point in history, decided they were too volatile to preserve in the public canon. Here is the first knowledge bombshell the seeker must absorb. The Book of Enoch was not a marginal curiosity. It was not a late fabrication cooked up in some obscure Hellenistic scriptorium. Modern scholarship, including the landmark work done following the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran in 1947, has demonstrated that multiple manuscripts of the Book of Enoch existed in the Qumran library. Not one manuscript, not two, multiple. Fragmentary, yes, but present, venerated, studied, copied by the community of Essenes who lived in those desert cliffs and who understood themselves to be the inheritors of the most ancient spiritual tradition on earth. Scholars at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and the École Biblique in Jerusalem, upon analyzing these Qumran fragments, dated portions of the Aramaic Enoch texts to the 3rd and 2nd centuries before the Common Era, placing them among the oldest biblical manuscripts ever recovered. Some fragments may represent traditions far older still. The Book of Enoch was known to the authors of the New Testament. It was known to the early church fathers. Tertullian, writing in the 2nd century of the Common Era, accepted it as authentic scripture. Origen, one of the most brilliant theological minds of the ancient world, engaged with it seriously. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church, one of the oldest Christian bodies on earth, a church that traces its lineage to the eunuch baptized by Philip in Acts chapter 8, has preserved the complete Ethiopic Book of Enoch, known as First Enoch, in its scriptural canon for over 1,500 years without interruption. The question is not whether the Book of Enoch existed. The question is, why was it removed? And what does it say that made its removal necessary? Chapter 2. The name and the number, the Hebrew word Chanakh, anglicized as Enoch, carries a constellation of meanings that a simple translation cannot capture. From the root Chanakh, it means to train, to dedicate, to initiate. In the ancient world, this word was used to describe the consecration of a building, the moment a structure was set apart for sacred use. It is the word from which the Hebrew festival of Hanukkah derives its name. The rededication of the temple in Jerusalem. Enoch, then, is the dedicated one, the consecrated one, the one whose very existence was set apart for a purpose that exceeded ordinary human appointment. But there is another layer. In ancient Mesopotamian tradition, the civilizational matrix within which the earliest Genesis narratives were shaped and from which they emerged in pointed theological contrast, there exists a figure of startling parallel. The Sumerian king list, one of the oldest written documents in human history, preserved on clay tablets that now reside in the Ashmolean Museum at Oxford and the Iraq Museum in Baghdad, contains a list of antediluvian kings who ruled before the Great Flood. The seventh king on the Sumerian list, the seventh, just as Enoch is the seventh from Adam, is named Enmeduranki. He was the king of Sippar, the city of the sun god Shamash. And the Sumerian texts tell us something extraordinary about this seventh king. He was taken up into the presence of the gods. He was shown the secrets of heaven. He was given divine knowledge, the tablets of the gods, the mysteries of the celestial realm. And he returned to humanity as the founder of a line of diviners, scribes of sacred knowledge, keepers of the hidden things. The parallels between Enmeduranki and Enoch are not coincidental. They are too precise, too structurally identical, to be dismissed as independent invention. Both are seventh in their respective lineages. Both are taken into divine presence. Both are associated with the transmission of forbidden or hidden knowledge. Both exist in traditions that predate the canonical formation of the Hebrew scriptures as we have received them. What does this mean? It means one of two things, and the seeker must sit with both possibilities without flinching. Either the Genesis account of Enoch is a theological reinterpretation of an ancient Near Eastern archetype, a Hebrew reworking of Mesopotamian tradition, deliberately reoriented to center on the God of Abraham rather than the pantheon of Sumer. Or it means that both traditions, Hebrew and Sumerian alike, are drawing from a common historical memory. A memory of something that actually happened. A man or men in the antediluvian world who stood at the intersection of the human and the divine. The Jewish philosopher Philo of Alexandria, writing in the 1st century of the Common Era, described Enoch in terms that would have been immediately recognizable to any student of Platonic philosophy, as a soul that had been perfectly translated from the material world to the immaterial. Not a death, a transformation, a metastasis, a Greek word meaning a change of condition, a transfer of state. The Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures made in Alexandria in the 3rd century before the Common Era, the version of scripture quoted most frequently in the New Testament itself, renders the enigmatic Hebrew phrase "God took him" with the Greek word metatithemi, to transpose, to transfer, to translate from one place to another. And the author of Hebrews, in that magnificent 11th chapter, the Great Hall of Faith, draws on this exact Greek rendering when writing. By faith Enoch was translated, that he should not see death, and was not found, because God had translated him. For before his translation, he had this testimony, that he pleased God. Translated, not died, not buried, not mourned. Translated, the word itself becomes a doorway, if the seeker is willing to step through it. Chapter 3. What Enoch Saw, the Heavenly Journey. The Book of Enoch, in its fullness, is not one document. It is a library. Scholars have organized its component parts into 5 major sections, often called the 5 books of Enoch: the Book of the Watchers, the Book of Parables, or Similitudes, the Astronomical Book, the Book of Dream Visions, and the Epistle of Enoch. The oldest of these, the Book of the Watchers and the Astronomical Book, are based on the Qumran fragments, among the earliest Jewish religious texts in existence outside the Torah itself. What does this library contain? It contains a vision of the cosmos so vast, so structured, so architecturally precise, that scholars of ancient astronomy have compared it to an observatory report. Enoch describes the movements of the sun and moon, the gates through which they pass at the horizon, the regulation of the calendar, the lengths of seasons, The astronomical Book of Enoch presents a 364-day solar calendar, a calendar that was actually in use at Qumran, in contrast to the lunar calendar adopted by mainstream Judaism, a calendar that some researchers believe preserves an ancient pre-exilic Hebrew reckoning of time that was lost when Jerusalem fell to Babylon. But the cosmological sections, staggering as they are not what has made the Book of Enoch controversial across 3 millennia. What has made it controversial is found in its very first chapters, the Book of the Watchers. Enoch's journey begins with a vision. The text tells us that he was in his house, mourning and weeping, and that the vision came upon him like a storm of clarity. He was lifted, transported, taken through the heavens in a journey that the text describes with the specificity of a man who has actually been somewhere and is doing his best to report what he witnessed with the vocabulary available to him. He sees the dwelling places of the righteous. He sees the prison of the fallen ones, a concept we will explore in deep detail. He sees the 4 winds. He sees a wall of fire that surrounds the throne of the Almighty, and beyond that wall, a structure of crystal, and beyond that, a house of fire that burned hot and bright, and within it, a second house greater than the first, and within that second house, a throne of fire upon which sat one whose garment was whiter than any snow, and whose face was like the appearance of the sun. Enoch falls. He collapses before this vision. He cannot stand. And it is here, prostrate before the divine throne, that the purpose of his journey is revealed. He has been sent as a messenger, not a messenger from God to humanity, though he is that too. In this extraordinary moment, Enoch is sent as a messenger from the human world to the divine council. He has been given a petition to deliver, a petition from the Watchers. Here, the text deepens into territory that has no parallel in the sanitized surface of Genesis. The Watchers, the sons of God, the Bene Ha-Elohim. Chapter 4, the descent, the Watchers, and the wound in heaven. Genesis chapter 6, 4 verses. Some of the most compressed, most explosive, most debated verses in the entire Bible. And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. Sons of God, Bene Ha-Elohim. 3 major interpretive traditions have wrestled with this phrase across the centuries. The Sethite interpretation, popular in many modern evangelical traditions, argues that the sons of God refers to the godly line of Seth intermarrying with the ungodly line of Cain, a spiritual compromise that produced corrupt offspring. The rulership interpretation suggests that these were human kings or rulers, perhaps divine right monarchs, whose unions with common women produced a class of tyrannical overlords. And then there is the oldest interpretation, the one embraced by the authors of the Dead Sea Scrolls, by the early church fathers, including Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, Clement of Alexandria, and Tertullian, and by virtually every known Jewish commentator in the Second Temple period. The angelic interpretation. The sons of God were angelic beings, watchers, divine sentinels assigned to observe and guide humanity. And they fell. The Book of Enoch does not soften this. It does not allegorize it. It gives the episode a weight and a specificity that Genesis, in its restraint, withholds. Enoch chapter 6. And it came to pass, when the children of men had multiplied, that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. And the angels, the children of the heaven, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose us wives from among the children of men, and beget us children. And Semjaza, who was their leader, said unto them, I fear ye will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin. And they all answered him and said, Let us all swear an oath, and all bind ourselves by mutual imprecations, not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing. 200. The Book of Enoch specifies the number. 200 watchers descended onto the summit of Mount Hermon. Hermon, from the Hebrew cherem, meaning the thing set apart for destruction, the devoted thing, the thing placed under bond. Even the mountain's name carries within it the weight of what was done there. They swore an oath, a collective binding oath, and then they descended. The leader of this descent is named Semjaza, but the Book of Enoch gives us a second figure of equal or greater importance in the unfolding catastrophe. Azazel. And it is Azazel who brings a particular knowledge to humanity that the text treats as uniquely destructive. Azazel taught men the making of swords, of knives, of shields, and of breastplates. He taught them the art of metallurgy, the secrets of weaponized metal. He taught women the arts of adornment, the knowledge of roots, of cosmetics, of the beautification of the body for seduction and vanity. Other watchers taught additional forbidden knowledge, the cutting of roots and healing herbs, the resolution of enchantments, astrology, the movement of the stars, weather patterns, the writing of signs upon the earth. And the result? The earth was corrupted. Violence filled the world. The Nephilim, the offspring of the union between the watchers and human women, were giants of enormous stature and voracious appetite, and they consumed the labor of humanity, and then its flesh, and then turned on one another. The text describes a world drowning not merely in flood water, but in a pre-flood darkness of appetites unleashed, boundaries shattered, created order undone. Here, the cry of the righteous rises to heaven. The archangels, Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel, stand at their stations and look down and see the blood crying from the earth. And they bring the petition to the Ancient of Days. And the Ancient of Days responds. Raphael is sent to bind Azazel, to cast him into darkness, to cover him with rocks in the desert in a place called Dudael, and seal him there until the day of judgment. The symbolism here is not lost on students of Leviticus chapter 16, where the scapegoat, the Azazel goat, is sent into the wilderness bearing the sins of Israel. The connection between the wilderness ritual and the imprisoned watcher is precise, ancient, and deeply encoded. Gabriel is sent to destroy the Nephilim, to set them against one another in civil war so that they consume themselves. Michael is sent to bind Semjaza and his company of fallen watchers in the valleys of the earth in darkness for 70 generations until the great day of judgment. And Enoch, the seventh from Adam, the dedicated one, is the messenger who carries all of this, who stands between worlds, who is trusted with knowledge that would shatter an ordinary mind. It is not comfort that Enoch carries. It is witness. He has seen the cosmic machinery of consequence at work. He has watched divine justice begin to move, and he knows, as perhaps no human being before or since has known with such absolute clarity, that what is hidden from the eyes of men is not hidden from the eyes of the one who made them. Chapter 5. The Corruption. What Enoch prophesied. The Epistle of Jude, that brief and often overlooked letter tucked near the end of the New Testament, makes a statement so audacious that most readers pass over it without registering its full weight. Jude quotes Enoch directly, by name. And Enoch also, the seventh from Adam, prophesied of these, saying, Behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000s of his saints, to execute judgment upon all, and to convince all that are ungodly among them of all their ungodly deeds which they have ungodly committed, and of all their hard speeches which ungodly sinners have spoken against him. This quotation is found in 1 Enoch chapter 1, verses 9 through 10. It is not a paraphrase. It is not a general allusion. It is a direct citation of a text that was, at the time Jude wrote, considered authoritative, considered, in the most serious sense, Scripture. The implications are seismic. If Jude, writing under the inspiration recognized by the church that canonized his letter, quotes from the Book of Enoch as authoritative prophecy, then the question of why that book was subsequently removed from the canon of most Christian traditions becomes not merely an academic curiosity, but a theological crisis of the first order. What happened between the 1st century and the 4th, when the councils of the early church solidified what would and would not be included in the sacred record? What considerations drove the exclusion of a text that an apostolic writer treated as genuine prophecy of the 7th patriarch from Adam? Some scholars point to the increasing discomfort in early Christianity with the angelic interpretation of Genesis 6. An interpretation that carried with it implications about the nature of spiritual warfare, the vulnerability of the material world to supernatural corruption, and the existence of a cosmic conflict that has never been fully resolved. As Christianity moved into the Greek philosophical mainstream, as it negotiated with Platonic and Neoplatonic frameworks of thought, the raw, almost violent mythological energy of the Enochic tradition became harder to manage within the emerging institutional structures of the Church. Other scholars point to the figure of Azazel and the forbidden knowledge he transmitted. A text that gives precise names and detailed accounts of how forbidden knowledge entered the human world, metallurgy for warfare, astrology, the manipulation of desire, is a text with extraordinary political implications. It places the origin of human violence and corruption not in human nature alone, but in a deliberate transgression by cosmic beings. It distributes the moral weight of human suffering across a landscape far larger and more terrifying than simple human sinfulness. And it demands accountability, not merely human repentance, but cosmic reckoning. There is a third reason, perhaps the most disturbing of all, that the Enochic tradition was suppressed. Enoch prophesied against the leadership of Israel. The latter sections of 1 Enoch, particularly the Book of Dream Visions and the Epistle of Enoch, contain apocalyptic prophecies of breathtaking scope. In the Animal Apocalypse, one of the most remarkable visionary texts of the ancient world, Enoch sees the entire history of Israel and the nations rendered as a symbolic drama of animals: bulls and sheep, wolves and lions, eagles and ravens. The shepherds of Israel, the leaders, the priests, the kings, are judged with particular harshness. They are weighed and found wanting. They have failed in their guardianship. They have allowed the flock to be scattered and devoured. This is not a comfortable prophecy for any religious establishment. It is the kind of prophecy that gets a text banned. The Epistle of Enoch is equally confrontational. Chapters 94 through 105 contain a series of woes, directed specifically at the wealthy, the powerful, the corrupt administrators of justice, the scribes who have written falsehood, the rulers who have oppressed the righteous and the poor. These woes are almost indistinguishable in tone and content from the thundering denunciations of Amos and Isaiah. But they carry an additional weight. They come from Enoch, from the man who walked with God, from the one who has stood before the divine throne and returned. When the one who has seen the face of God speaks against you, you have a choice. You can repent, or you can destroy the record of his words. History suggests a preference for the latter. Chapter 6. The second Enoch and the secret of paradise. The Book of Enoch that most scholars refer to as First Enoch, the Ethiopic text, the Qumran fragments. But there is a second Book of Enoch, known as Second Enoch or the Slavonic Enoch or the Book of the Secrets of Enoch. This text, preserved in old Slavonic manuscripts from the medieval period, contains traditions that are believed by many scholars to predate its Slavonic transmission by well over 1,000 years. 2 Enoch expands the heavenly journey in directions that First Enoch only gestures toward. In Second Enoch, the patriarch is taken through 7 heavens, a cosmological structure that appears elsewhere in Jewish mystical tradition, in the Merkabah mysticism of the Talmudic period, in Paul's reference in 2 Corinthians to being caught up to the 3rd heaven. In each heaven, Enoch encounters different classes of angelic beings, different aspects of the cosmic architecture. In the 5th heaven, he sees the Grigori, the Watchers, those who fell, still weeping and mourning over their transgression, faces downcast, silent. In the 6th, he sees the angels who govern the cosmos, who control the movements of stars and seasons, who stand in perfect ordered obedience before the face of the Lord. And in the 7th, in the highest heaven, the heaven of heavens, Enoch stands before the throne itself. What happens next is among the most astonishing moments in ancient religious literature. The Lord commands the archangel Verivael to bring out the books from the celestial library. And Verivael brings them, all of human history, past and future, inscribed in the divine record. And Enoch is given 30 days to read them, 30 days in which he absorbs 360 books, the entirety of created knowledge, the secrets of the cosmos, the hidden things that lie beneath the surface of the visible world. Then the Lord speaks to Enoch directly. He tells him things that no ear of flesh has heard. He explains the mechanics of creation from the void, a cosmological account that uses language strikingly similar to, and yet significantly different from, the account in Genesis 1. He speaks of the fallen ones and of the pre-cosmic rebellion. He speaks of time, of how human time and divine time are not the same, of how a day before the Lord is as 1,000 years, of how the entirety of human history fits within a span that the divine perspective can hold in a single reckoning. And then the Lord gives Enoch his commission. He is to return to earth. He has 30 days to instruct his sons, to transmit the knowledge he has received, to preserve it in books, to give it to his children as an inheritance that will survive the coming catastrophe. 30 days. And then the angels will come for him. This detail, the 30 days of earthly instruction, the transmission of knowledge before the final translation, gives the Enochic literature a quality that is both poignant and urgent. Enoch is not simply taken. He is given time, given the mercy of preparation, given the chance to say what must be said to those who will remain. What does he say? He speaks of righteousness. He speaks of mercy toward the poor. He speaks of honesty in weights and measures, a practical ethic embedded in the cosmic. Because the seeker who has stood before the throne of the Almighty knows that the smallest injustice in a market stall is felt as a tremor in the fabric of creation itself. He speaks of the care of animals, of the integrity of oaths, of the love of one's neighbor as a manifestation of love for the one who made both the neighbor and the self. This is not abstract mysticism. This is the most grounded, most practical, most demanding ethic conceivable, because it is grounded not in human sentiment or social contract, but in direct vision of the source of all moral reality. And then he is gone, translated, beyond the reach of death, beyond the reach of those who would silence him. Chapter 7. The Dead Sea Scrolls and the Vindication. In the spring of 1947, a Bedouin shepherd named Muhammad Adib was searching for a lost goat in the cliffs above the northwestern shore of the Dead Sea. He threw a stone into a cave to startle any animal that might be inside. He heard, instead of the sound of a frightened goat, the sound of shattering pottery. What he had found would become the most significant archaeological discovery in the history of biblical scholarship. The Dead Sea Scrolls. More than 900 manuscripts, fragments of every book of the Hebrew Bible except Esther, together with an extraordinary library of previously unknown texts, had lain in those caves for approximately 2,000 years, sealed in clay jars by a community of Jewish sectarians who buried their sacred library before the Romans came and erased them from the earth. Among those scrolls, among those fragments of the ancient world preserved by the dry desert air, were the Aramaic fragments of the Book of Enoch. Not one, not two. As previously noted, multiple copies suggesting that the Book of Enoch was not a peripheral curiosity for the Qumran community. It was central. It was venerated. It may have been. For these desert monks who awaited the end of days with fierce and unwavering attention, as authoritative as the Torah itself. The discovery did not merely vindicate the antiquity of the Enochic literature. It fundamentally reoriented the scholarly understanding of Second Temple Judaism. That rich, complex, contested period between the return from Babylon and the destruction of the temple in 70 of the Common Era, the period in which both Christianity and Rabbinic Judaism took their formative shape. What the Qumran fragments revealed was a Judaism far more diverse, far more apocalyptically charged, far more engaged with the Enochic traditions than the normative Rabbinic tradition, which eventually excluded Enoch from the canon at the Council of Jamnia, circa 90 CE, had been willing to acknowledge. Father Józef Milik, the Polish Dominican priest and scholar who spent decades working on the Qumran fragments, concluded in his landmark 1976 study of the Aramaic Enoch fragments that the tradition preserved in 1st Enoch was not a derivative of the Genesis text, but may actually predate it in its Aramaic form. The implications of this conclusion, that the Genesis account of Enoch in chapter 5 may be a distillation, a compressed summary of a much larger and older tradition, remain contested but have never been definitively refuted. The seeker should sit with this. If Milik is correct, if the Enochic literature is not a later expansion of Genesis, but an earlier tradition that Genesis compressed, then what we have in the Book of Enoch is not extra-canonical speculation. It is the bedrock. It is the deep memory that Genesis summarizes in 6 words and trusts the reader to have enough context to understand. And he was not, for God took him. 6 words over a vast and ancient sea of testimony. Chapter 8. Enoch in the tradition of nations. The story of Enoch does not belong to the Hebrew tradition alone. This is a point that demands serious attention, because it either confirms the universality of a genuine historical memory, or it reveals the degree to which certain archetypal stories echo across the human collective in ways that exceed simple cultural borrowing. In the Islamic tradition, Enoch is identified with the prophet Idris, a figure mentioned in the Quran in Surah Maryam and Surah Al-Anbiya. Idris is described as a man of truth, a prophet, who was raised to a high station. The Islamic commentators, drawing on earlier Jewish and Christian traditions, identify this high station with the 4th heaven and connect Idris directly with the Enoch of Genesis, the man who did not die, but was lifted into the divine presence. The Islamic tradition preserves an additional detail of remarkable interest. Idris is credited with being the first to write with a pen, the first to sew with a needle, the first to study the science of the stars. This corresponds with extraordinary precision to the Enochic tradition of heavenly knowledge transmission. The idea that Enoch received and transmitted astronomical and scribal knowledge from the divine realm. In the traditions of certain Gnostic communities of the early Christian era, groups that the mainstream church labeled heretical and whose texts were largely destroyed until the discovery of the Nag Hammadi library in Egypt in 1945. Enoch appears as a cosmic scribe, a figure who records the transactions of the divine council and maintains the celestial archives. Some Gnostic texts equate Enoch with the divine scribe Metatron of the Jewish mystical tradition, a heavenly being of extraordinary power and proximity to the divine throne. The identification of Enoch with Metatron appears explicitly in 3 Enoch, also known as the Hebrew Book of Enoch or Sefer Hekalot, a text of the Jewish mystical tradition, the Merkabah mysticism, that describes the transformation of the mortal Enoch into the angelic Metatron upon his translation to heaven. In this tradition, Enoch does not merely visit the divine realm and return. He is remade, transformed, given a body of fire, wings, and a throne next to the divine throne. He becomes the Lesser YHWH, a description so theologically explosive that it generated controversy among rabbinic authorities for centuries. The name Metatron itself has defied definitive etymological resolution. Some scholars derive it from the Greek Metathronon, one who stands beside the throne. Others connect it to the Latin Metator, one who measures, one who marks boundaries. Still others see it as a deliberate encryption, a coded name for a figure whose identity was considered too sensitive to name directly. What is clear across all these traditions, Hebrew, Islamic, Gnostic, mystical, is that Enoch occupies a position unlike any other antediluvian figure. He is not merely remembered. He is revered. He is assigned cosmic function. He is the man whose walking with God became something more than metaphor, something more than piety, something more than an upright life and a peaceful death. He became the living proof that the boundary between the human and the divine is not, in the ultimate reckoning, a wall. It is a threshold. Chapter 9. The Final Judgment. Enoch's enduring prophecy returned now to Jude, to those extraordinary verses in which an apostolic writer, in a letter accepted by the Universal Church, quotes from a text that the Church would subsequently exclude from the canon. Behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000s of his saints to execute judgment upon all. The word translated 10,000s in this passage is the Greek myrias, 10,000, the largest numerical unit in classical Greek reckoning. The same word appears in Revelation chapter 5, where the seer in the Spirit hears the voice of many angels around the throne, and the number of them was 10,000 times 10,000 and thousands of thousands. The convergence is not accidental. Enoch's prophecy, as preserved in 1 Enoch chapter 1 and quoted in Jude, is a prophecy of the final accounting, of the moment when the scales of cosmic justice, which have been slowly tipping across the long millennia of human history, reach their terminal position and the great reckoning begins. What does that reckoning look like, according to the Enochic tradition? It looks like accountability that reaches back to the very first transgression. The watchers who descended on Hermon and bound themselves with an oath to corrupt the earth, they will be judged. Azazel, buried under his stones in the desert, waiting in darkness. His waiting will end. The Nephilim, the corrupt offspring, the violence they seeded in the world, it will be answered for. But the reckoning does not stop with the cosmic criminals. It extends to every human being who has committed the human version of the same transgressions. The accumulation of unjust wealth, the oppression of the poor, the corruption of justice, the use of knowledge for destruction rather than illumination. The woes of the Epistle of Enoch. Woe to you who acquire silver and gold in unrighteousness and say, "We have become rich with riches and have treasure, and have accomplished everything we desired. And now let us do what we purposed, for we have gathered silver, and many are the husbandmen in our houses, and our granaries are brim-full as with water." These woes have an eerily contemporary resonance that the seeker should not be too comfortable with. Enoch is not merely a story from the deep past. He is a mirror held up to every present moment. Because the transgressions he witnessed, the corruption of knowledge, the commodification of violence, the seduction of beauty divorced from virtue, the accumulation of power without accountability. These transgressions did not end with the flood. They resumed. They have never ceased. And Enoch prophesied against them all. From the seventh position in the Antediluvian lineage, from the moment of his translation beyond the reach of death, his words have continued to press against the sealed door of the canon, demanding to be heard. Some have heard them. The Essenes in their desert caves, the Ethiopian monks who copied them on goatskin in their highland monasteries, the early fathers who cited them before the institutional pressure of orthodoxy made citation dangerous, the scholars at Qumran who died defending their library, who sealed their scrolls in clay jars and hoped, correctly, as it turned out, that the dry desert air would preserve what human violence could not destroy. And today, in the age in which we live, the scrolls have been found. The texts have been translated. The fragments have been analyzed with tools that the Essenes could not have imagined. And the voice of Enoch, the seventh from Adam, the one who walked with God, the one who was taken, is audible again. Conclusion. The threshold that remains. There is a question that the Enochic tradition presses upon every seeker who encounters it with sufficient seriousness. And it is a question that no amount of scholarship, no depth of archaeological recovery, can finally answer on behalf of the one who asks it. The question is not simply, did Enoch exist? Or, is the Book of Enoch historically reliable? Or even, why was it removed from the canon? These are important questions. They deserve serious attention, and they have received it here. But they are not the question that Enoch himself poses. The question Enoch poses, from the seventh position in the Antediluvian lineage, from the summit of his extraordinary and unrepeated biography, is the question that his life, even more than his writings, embodies. Is it possible to walk with God? Not as a theological proposition, not as a doctrinal affirmation, not as a Sunday morning sentiment, but as the defining reality of a human existence, as the orientation of a life so consistently, so persistently, so entirely bent toward the divine that the boundary between the mortal and the eternal becomes, over the long years of that life, thinner and thinner, until it simply gives way? Enoch walked with God. The Hebrew phrase is hithalek et ha-Elohim, a reflexive, intensive, continuous verb form. He was continually walking, he was persistently walking. Not a single moment of communion, but a sustained orientation. A life lived in unbroken attunement to the frequency of the divine. 365 years. The same number as the days in a solar year, a detail that the ancient interpreters, who saw nothing as accidental in the sacred text, understood as deeply significant. A complete solar cycle, a full revolution, a life that was, in its very numerical shape, a kind of cosmic completeness. And then, he was not. The ancient rabbis were disturbed by this. They filled the silence of those 3 words, "He was not," with elaborate explanations, each one revealing more about the anxiety the text provoked than about Enoch himself. One tradition says he was taken suddenly, like the flame of a lamp snatched away before it could be extinguished. Another says he was taken before his time because God foresaw that he would eventually fall. An interpretation that the author of Hebrews seems to directly contradict by attributing his translation to the perfection of his faith. Perhaps the most honest response to the mystery of Enoch's departure is not explanation at all. Perhaps it is the response that the text itself seems to invite. Silence. Wonder. A willingness to stand at the edge of what can be known and look, without flinching, into the distance where the last traces of him disappear. He was not, for God took him. There is a tradition in certain streams of Jewish mysticism that Enoch did not simply vanish from the earth. He continues to intercede. He continues from his station near the divine throne, whether as Metatron or as something for which human language has no adequate name, to hold the record, to maintain the accounting, to preserve in the celestial archives the documentation of everything done and undone in the long, turbulent, blood-soaked, beauty-streaked history of the world he left behind. If that tradition is more than metaphor, if it points, however imperfectly, toward a reality that exceeds our categories, then Enoch's witness is not finished. The man who walked with God and was taken continues, in whatever mode of existence lies beyond the veil of translation, to do what he has always done, to see clearly, to record faithfully, and to await the moment when the one who took him returns with 10,000s of his saints to settle, finally and completely, the great unanswered questions of the cosmos. The 7th from Adam, the dedicated one, the man who walked with God. He has not forgotten what he saw, and those who study his testimony with the seriousness it deserves have not quite been able to forget it either. The ancient texts are rarely comfortable. They do not flatter us. They do not confirm our assumptions or validate our preconceptions. They press on us with the weight of a reality far older and far larger than any particular moment in human history, including this one. But they also promise something that our present moment desperately needs. They promise that what has been hidden shall be revealed, that what has been sealed shall be opened, that the knowledge driven underground by violence and institutional fear will resurface, as it did in the caves of Qumran, as it did in the cliffs above the Dead Sea, as it did in the Coptic jars of Nag Hammadi, and that the long patience of truth exceeds the short reach of those who would extinguish it. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, but his words remain. If this investigation has stirred something in the seeker, if the mystery of Enoch has opened a corridor that you are not yet ready to leave, then the archive continues. In our next exploration, we descend into the tradition of the Nephilim, the giants of the antediluvian world, their shadow across scripture and archaeology, and the question that no one who has read the flood narrative carefully can entirely avoid. Did the catastrophe of Genesis 6 end the corruption, or merely pause it? The record has been preserved. The questions are older than the answers we have been given, and this channel will continue to go where the evidence leads, regardless of how uncomfortable the destination. Subscribe. Stay with the inquiry. And until the next archive opens, walk carefully. The ground beneath the familiar is deeper than it appears.